Okay. So everyone's ready? Yep. First, pursue method counter structures uses time to represent an ability to stick apps. You have the easy. Second, if you have an to counter is reasonably fair what's not interior theory, the front of violence or show, both apps, eight, the next with the app, or theory and for the red, true time, see this energy, the only for things let the app collapse, theory and or for the defend their interpretation. And be completely usually suit the theoretical interpretation for the app, dumb mind, subject theory, no matter what they see, also means no negative arguments, drop negative theory, and workshop the argument that's going to interpret and does some subject theory around. Third, CX checks for file, to get with theory, doing time, the agreements, learning, for debate. So ignore all three, then check CX, we would this be harm subject, and there is only in round, we speak out of the next theory, and perspective, and our DC, we only evaluate the throughout all speeches. Fourth, skeptics the question whether morality exists, not whether any consider this skeptics in the resolution, just asking whether the resolutional action is significantly met morality. And if morality does not exist, then everything logically exists, the resolution is true. Fifth, no morality means there's no moral obligation for voting because you have no reason to do it. Not the resolution affirms it means there's no practice to shift to being, which means you stay in the apples of the world in which we're in and we are. And the term autoplacency of function and scope. Autoplacency to get about, for example, machines all around within the narrative that was better to run down the oil. For further such instance A, integration the same returns all with the role around to discuss our function, the value tendency that will actually relevant to the real world, the reciprocity. A functional object counts the world from splitting to be down opportunity reciprocity heaters and jurors, and reciprocity is key to fairness and cycle opportunity to win. And a piece that doesn't occur in round of non-piece of identity and unfairness, and you're punishing for something I didn't do, it doesn't deserve. And the resolution says in democracy, like you're asking about whether the nature of the democracy says democracy implies but out people implies that the debates about the systematic features of democracy what they apply. Thus, discussing functional features is textually made so that we can reach a categorical statement of the resolution. So the negative must use normative logic derived, and also the negative must use normative logic derived to be like conclusion about the falsity of the resolutional obligation. Critique my axioms, smash about the resolution fails to directly refute the normativity of the resolution. Textuality is key for determines the basis of pre-round preparation. This is also the most reciprocal interpretations of the most argument for skill doing, and reciprocity case ensures cross-line reciprocity. Critiques also kill strategic options by opening new conclusive layer and forcing athletes to resolve the error. And strategy for instance is key to forming balance rhythm with the round. And even if moral objects and moral statements are functional first, arguments of being analytic on the operator that recently fails from design becomes aim, you cross appeal some logical line that provides the ground of this. That law must be telling synthetic operations known as the proposition can inform the context of concepts like A, B, but that law is synthetic that grounds justified synthesis can be questioned as well. Leading to an infinite regress. Only my purpose requires some setting to economics because the function is analytically a part of action. Epistemology precludes the favor space of all epistemology, including moral truths. This also precludes the day on the practical words which rely upon synthetically between actual logical laws and part of the rational agents. Day also requires rationality to speak of morality. Further than the moral second, the nature of moral language means that the obligation of human the reason their function, the very concept of the morally good aspects of achieve the function. Thompson explains foot. Good is attributed attribute that the criteria of its correct application are derived from the corresponding average. For example, this is a good knife applies correctly only line of what it is to be a good knife. This practical feature of good is not achieved with judgments are of moral goodness. The moral use of good belongs to the same logical class as the use of good, and particular evaluations already made by other living beings. And briefly, arguments for some projects are relevant. The only reason we think things are offensive is because we individually form our own ethical conceptions. Thus, the relevance of all impacts assume some framework like mine. Second, third, arguments from some moral language preclude other frameworks because we get a little bit around from proceeds of the moral language also to the argument becomes subject. For example, even if you just think you understand what is meant by util, just thinking outward as a plethora of implications that can lead to different conclusions. The theoretical framework can be found something truly debatable on the moral language is the basic framework used for the round. Fourth, moral justice must be analytically derived from the subject of ethical thought derived in ethical process from which the further ethical conclusion may be deduced. The structure of moral doesn't be some function of a certain entity in order to be functional. McIntyre. In a valid argument, nothing can appear their conclusion which is not already in the premises from such factual statements such as this watch is inaccurate and in time period, the conclusion involved this watch is bad. This argument is valid because the aspect of the watch involved the concept of watch cannot be defined independently be good watch within moral arguments. It's also necessary for conditions to establishing a moral theory that even the moral theory are different. This one is the function of an agent. Absent function, we wouldn't be able to justify any moral conclusions around it would cease to function. And fairness comes first becomes before discourse because the valid aspect of the better debater was not the better cheater. Also, absent them resolving to the debate where we don't know whether they win since fairness says what you have access to. Thus, the standard is consistency with function. Additionally, I need to interpret the defines moral obligations since I have still just like standard that generates normative moral obligations. Moreover, the notion of compulsory voting is have all votes and divide after non-people legally vote provided concurrent to voting thus it's best possible to have all voted in democracy. Moreover, under this interpretation that also voting in democracy implies that voting out actually be compulsory. It is not whether not voting compulsory voting actually increases the voter turnout. The way functional operates that all that matters is that the intentionality of the function is to increase voter turnout. Actually, consequences do not matter in this syndrome. I contend that it's consistent with the function of democracy for voting to be compulsory first. Democracies require all citizens to vote since democracy must be acted based on the public citizens' barber. Democracy relies on participation in a community that approaches public goods with their own before public goods are forward to the act of public participation. Universality of participation is cycle. Democracy creates the citizens it depends on because it mandates confrontation between me as a citizen and the other citizen. Two implications A. Since the function of compulsory voting is that maximalist participation in democracy, it is consistent with the function of democracy, which requires universal participation. B. A democracy's ability to actively participation of people since democracy makes citizens based on public citizens by definition. So if not everyone voted, the state would fail since it connect. Thus it can no longer fulfill its function no matter what its function is. Since the state doesn't exist, it can't possibly be with any sort of function. Second, there is no right not to vote. It is impossible to invert a right Harvard law review. An individual who possesses the right have the absolute power to rate the right Harvard the very idea that requires remove his false rights cannot be waived. There are competing interests at stake. An individual right may serve both the public and private interest, and grading the absolute individual right or waiver would we leave out of the public that right serves. Thus, there is a strong enough collective agency that states voting should credit the individual right to go from becoming a neighbor's right now, but the individual life of voting is essential to the collective ability to have democratic government, and as such should not be waivable. So compulsory voting is constitutive of democracy since rights cannot be waived. When one is right, you must exercise the right of making all rights obligations. Waiving rights and non-exercising indirectly violates the rights of others. When we don't use these rights, we are not considered the function of democracy. The democracy requires recognizing the will of the people. Third, participation by all the function of democracy weeks. Participation by a few citizens offers policy and received representation of views. The goal of democracy requires participation. The goal of democracy is to generate the political will necessary to take effective action. Without participation, democracy will not provide citizens with the experience of public deliberation necessary to affect the local political culture. And compulsory voting raises voter turnout. England offers a meta-analysis. A number of studies all conclude that compulsory voting effectively raises turnout across country compared to the average turnout with compulsory voting 10 to 15 percentage points higher than that. There's one considered voter researchers that is the most important factor in explaining increasing voters such as automatic registration, and we can rule out within country comparisons, which leads to no proof that wherever it is introduced, compulsory voting raises turnout. Data shows that the turnout always drops when such lots of balls and continue to drop in such countries. Thus, I affirm.
Start. Okay. Ready?
Justin?
Yeah, sure.
I don't feel comfortable, but I will.
Was. Sorry, go ahead.
Has someone eaten or
Alright, let's do this for
Okay, ready? The weeks card says that participation by a few citizens is bad because it offers a skewed representation of views. Does this mean that skewed representation
the
is bad?
function is to have all of them as many
Okay,
as
why do we want increased participation? Why is the participation we have in status
The
quo
function of a
sufficient?
democracy is to have as many people in.
Why is that the function of a democracy?
Because, well, first I state that up here.
Okay. Explain the warrant.
Okay, basically a democracy by definition is representing the will of the people. The best way to do that is a
Okay, so
government with
we
elected
weigh back to
representatives.
who best represents the will of the people. Is that correct?
Whatever the function is, whichever has the function of best expressing the will of the people and having as many people included as possible. Function, not actually.
Okay, you make an argument that like actual consequences don't matter. We only care about intention. Why is that justified?
Because the function of something is not determined by what it has done in the past.
Wait, why can't we say that if something like if we have a bad consequence, that would be inconsistent with the function? Like if compulsory voting decreases turnout, would that be consistent with the function of democracy?
For instance, if the function of a fork is to eat, but it ends up being used to like, I don't know, to like stab someone, that doesn't mean the function of the fork is to stab someone. That really means that
so
it
your
has
argument
done
is that the function isn't dependent on what it does. But why does that mean we don't care about
It
consequences
doesn't
at all?
matter about like, because that's all one that's like completely empirical. You make that argument.
Read me from the AC why it says intention is the only thing that matters.
All right. All that matters to increase voter turnout, and right up here, it's literally every single.
Read me from the AC.
Okay. Okay. Good is an attributive adjective, right here.
So we only care about intention?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about the theory spikes. Is there any
Function. If you.
Let's talk about theory spikes. Are there any preempts to negative counterplans?
No theory spikes. No.
Okay. Are there any preempts to pre-fiat arguments?
Yep.
Where?
Well.
Can you read me the preempt to the pre-fiat argument?
Yeah, sure. Let me just go through. Well, I read arguments why fairness would.
Read me from the AC.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So let me tell you what it says. You say fairness.
Okay.
You say fairness it comes first because otherwise, if we use discourse, we'd be determining the better cheater. Why is that the warrant?
Okay, because finding there is really no warrant, but there's
Okay,
other
so there
argument
is no warrant. Cool.
Yeah.
Let's talk about why skep flows out. Why does skep flow out? Explain me the warrant for this.
Okay, well there are two arguments. First,
let's go through them.
skepticism says morality doesn't exist, and morality restricts what actions like can be deemed moral. And
Wait, so then
there
why
is
would we
nothing
be
to
incapable
restrict.
of deeming this action moral?
What?
Why does that just mean that we would be incapable of deeming this particular action?
Because morality doesn't exist. That means there's
So how do
no
we generate
restrictions.
law?
There would be no restrictions on what it means to be moral. It means every action would be deemed moral.
Morality doesn't exist, so everything is moral.
That's what that would imply. Everything is consistent with what it means to be
okay.
moral. Oh, when you read, could I?
Yeah, that'll be fine.
I'm sorry.
So Neg will take form prep starting now. rather neg, has 1 minute left. The order is going to be NC framework, counter plan, app.
Say it one more time.
Framework, counter plan, app.
Can you hook it up with more data, please?
Yeah, cool.
Are we flowing the framework on the app, or are we flowing it as a separate framework?
Separate.
It's a separate framework. One for you. Pass it to them.
Yeah.
She needs it.
Wait, are these like responsive to this framework, or reading an independent framework?
Reading an independent framework.
Whoever needs it.
Alright.
What? I speak standing up, but if you want to read over my shoulder,
you
that's
do?
fine. No, it's fine. Don't worry about it. I have 30 seconds, so I'll find it. Everyone ready? Please stay clear. I negate roll-throughs to guys that actually go for guidance about subsequent social problems, but all cannot be divorced from the systemic inequalities in society about which to theorize. To break through the slow small thus empower young people to criticize structures of blue social norms. Row 1. Critical bench comprised of negative forms, reducing their demand themselves as eternally and placely valid education was criticized, not often define self through conceptual purity of the class outcomes into being. National objective education, oxymorons, next out of power relations, politics, pedagogies, particular place forces educators to rethink political badly, educational and counter-critical pedagogy needs to help students think critically about existing political and economic arrangements. And empower young people is a prerequisite to achieve democratic goals, agency, and self-government meaningless since they're just passive spectators, incapable of challenging institutions. Row 2. Only through critical education students become social agents, not just disengaged spectators, they must be willing not only to think otherwise, but also act and commitment to require reordering of power ranges fundamental democracy. Democracy can't work if citizens are self-starting, reflective, and independent qualities, independent for students to participate in and shape policy and institutional form. Pedagogy is a cornerstone of democracy that allows students not just to learn, but also how to be governed, but also how to govern critical knowledge and defense human possibilities by connecting what young people know to the desire to make the world different. Thus, the standard is empowering young people. My framework contextualizes your obligations to just debate as a unique educational activity that can teach you how to become critical thinkers, engaged with. Thus, you should go for advocacy that are actively engaged in and should relevant to young people rather than abstract philosophy that ignores social realities. Row 3. Debate reinforces something of democratic education by fostering a passionate discussion about social change and how to achieve debate, helps students learn skills and knowledge that enables them to be critical and engage citizens, research skills, and policy evaluation. Enough debate is a form of critical abilities that empower students to be effective advocates for democratic democracy and leaders to have always students must construct pedagogical practice to make knowledge meaningful, to remain present as active in the public sphere where students can learn how to invest in ideas that contribute to wider public discourse. Now the counterplan. A text. Voting should be compulsory only in the first election for which one is eligible. Pops clarifies. For the first election, young voters would be required to go to the polls, pay small fine if they didn't. They'd have it on the above options. They wouldn't be required to go vote for party B competition. The counterplan is mutually exclusive. The act requires all citizens to vote. The counterplan makes voluntary voting voting voluntary after your first election. Advantage 1 is inequality. There is a huge 40% turnout gap between young and old voters. This inequality outweighs class race and all the factors. Keeney. Age is the most significant demographic factor in voting up even more than social economic status. In 2005, only 35% of young voters compared to 75% of those aged over 65 young voters were half as likely to vote as older people. The age gap from growth consistently from 18 points in 1970 to 40 points in 2005, and compulsory voting increased age-based inequality and turnout since the vote motivates older people to turn out much more than motivates youth to intellier. The interaction between age and compulsory voting is highly significant. The older people respond to the more they comply with the duty to vote. Compulsory voting strengthens age differences in cultures. Countries where voting expands towards the voting is a civic duty, and the duty remains a powerful incentive to vote. But research shows the duty argument doesn't affect young people as it's compatible with the values of older generations. Thus, older people respond more to compulsory voting, increase the age gap and turnout. And since young people don't vote, politicians ignore them and make the brunt of the spending costs only the first time compulsory voting solves by uniquely empowering by young voters merge. Parties have become adept at targeting the groups most likely to vote in. So if your politicians speak to these young people, spending cuts services equal to 28% of the income for the young people, 10% for the old. Young people are shortchanged since politicians have scanned incentive to listen to the first time compulsory voting to boost the collective voice. Young people make all parties attentive to their concerns. And these cuts leave costly programs like social security untouched while slashing education benefits, also control the kill the economy of massively increasing federal debt. Marching. Democrats are too scared to speak up for young voters, so when baby boomers do fiscal reform, Medicare and Social Security emotionally untucked 2000, but the cheap programs that help young people fail to changes will cost students $100 billion over 10 years. That's there's a young American, old American, one takes from the other. The state spends $500 billion on Medicare, but only $70 billion on education. The U.S. spends 7 times more on the elderly than on children. The federal budget, the biggest student dollars, both Social Security, and spending cuts in education disempower youth by giving corporate funders influence and slashing scholarship for poor students to row 4. As corporate power everything takes the military agencies take over higher education, youth and critical education of the first class of the learn, being waged to force college to advance their autonomy, role in promoting democracy, higher education to increasingly administered in a corporate fashion scholarship programs that enable disadvantaged students to attend college have been ruthlessly cut back. Working class kids find they've been no chance to attend college, solidify their status expendable. Now the app. First, group his autonomy framework. The group his rather function framework. 1. I can concede that consistent with form, but one, Jerome 1, precedes the starting the only way to reason actually about what the form of democracy is to not divorce ourselves from social reality, but rather engage directly with them. This precedes because right within takes like Cato Institute always tells the democracy is a particular function. We need to be able to distance ourselves from the power relations that conservative donors. We need to be able to break free of this flawed epistemology, acknowledge the power relations, prevent us from actively reasoning about what function is. So the AC is prerequisite to the NC. But second, well, the only way to actually achieve democratic goals and be consistent with the functions to empower young people. Otherwise, we won't actually be having any, and we won't be able to achieve democratic values like self-government if you're just passive effective to accept whatever the government tells us, whatever the Congress tells us to do. But we so the only way to actually represent our interests in the will of the people is to actually challenge and contest what the democracy tells us to do. Then, of his pre-fiat arguments, one, he concedes and crosses there's no warrants given, no credence on them. And second, there's an infinite number of ways to structure burdens of the round, but the only way to determine how we should determine the better debater is to use some sort of external goal that is provided by the debate. This is only provided in the Roe 3, which tells us what it means to do the better debating. To do the better debating is actually engage in issues relevant to young people because that is a constituent purpose of debate. Then, often his argument about function. First, democracies, he says that one, there's no warranties, appealing back to the McIntyre curve, and none of this speaks to intention at all. This is just a preempt that is not actually warranted in the frame of the second. Democracies necessarily have to look at consequences. It's part of their function. People who empower politicians do so not because they think they will disperse out your gold, but rather because they think they'll disperse certain benefits. So when we vote people into policy, we necessarily do so, but we expect them to produce a certain policy action. Second, but the intention is inconsistent with the point of democracy. We can never violate other people's intentions, or always then be consistent with their particular intention. This would authorize one state of responsibility because all they have to say is that the intention was good. But second, we would never be able to pass any kind of policy because there will always be conflicting intentions. The state isn't some unified action that doesn't have intentions to affect politics. Then, off of the Barber. First, go up to the top of the framework with the spikes. First, off no neg RBIs. One. This leads to infinite abuse because he can just read a ton of theory shells in the next speech to skew my strategy. This is going to be the strongest thing because even if he has a strategy, he necessarily skews mine because he can just restart the entire debate and nullifying 7 minutes of speech time by going all over theory in the next speech. This is a word violation of fairness. Always his argument. Second, at least should at least allow me to contest it because the function of the round isn't clear. The RBI argument only has a specific function of the round until a theory shell has been introduced. So you should allow me to make new responses because the argument isn't complete until it's used in the function of a theory debate. Then, off this argument, the skepticism means that everything is true. One, there's always going to be a risk of often coming into the Drew framework. Because he can never fully disprove the theory. Second, this would mean that you would negate because if there's no reality, we can never say we can claim because it all implies a moral obligation. It multiplies consistent with function. If we can't determine function, we can never say that something we saw. So to negate means to deny the truth, and so I deny the truth of the resolution. Skeptics true. But now, go down to the contention level offense. First. He concedes and cross-sects that what it means to be a democracy to represent the will of the people. One, cross-apply the entire counterplan where I say that democracies that implement compulsory voting do not represent the will of the people because they create a 7-to-1 gap in spending between elderly and children. Second, because they only foster greater age-based inequality. This is the most important inequality in democracy. This is going to be the interlink to all this cards because one, the week's evidence simply said the purpose of increased participation is to create a more balanced public. But then. His arguments also one off his Barber argument. This is a non-sequitur. There's no warrant just because democracy depends on participation doesn't mean we have an obligation to maximize turnout. Just because turnout is valuable doesn't mean we don't have enough of it right now or that it's insufficient. Then also off his HL argument, just because there's no right to vote doesn't mean that we're automatically doing something. That doesn't mean we have duty to vote. Second off with his week's evidence, which says this evidence seizes the neg framework because it says we have to skewed participation occurs when there's lower turnout. So count plan turns the gap.
Okay. Use it.
What?
Do you want to sit down?
I'll stand.
Okay. So what does it mean to be the better debater?
Okay, that is contextualized in the Giroux 3 evidence. Giroux 3 says that the debate is a unique educational activity that can teach you how to become critical thinkers and engaged citizens. Thus, the judge should vote for advocacy that actually engage issues relevant to young people rather than abstract philosophy that obscures injustice. The argument that I make on the AC, there's an infinite ways to structure the burdens for the round. It could be through util, it could be through performance, it could be through critique framework. All of these provide fair ground on both sides and are trainable. But the only way that we can determine which one the judge should adopt is...
Alright, so this is a critique, right?
No, this is not a critique at all. What?
You're critiquing some part of my...
No, this is just a pre-fiat justification, a role of the ballot argument. It's not a critique at all. A critique is A is the link, B is the impact, C is the alt.
Okay, but it still functions the same way just without that structure, right?
Yeah, not at all. There's no reason why this is critical. I'm not critiquing an assumption of yours. Rather, I'm providing a positive model of debate that the judge should endorse.
Okay. So do you respond to each of the individual pre-fiat arguments, or you just say, like, you're going to grant me credence on these, or whatever?
Wait, what?
The individual spikes to reading pre-fiat argument justifications or whatever.
Wait, you mean my response to the pre-fiat spike in the app?
Yes.
So I make two arguments. One, in cross-sex you concede, oh, I guess this doesn't really have a warrant. So the judge shouldn't vote on it, especially if they don't have the flow, and you can articulate it.
Okay.
Second, my argument is the one I was just explaining to you about infinite number of proven structures.
Okay. You explain that again.
Sure. So the argument is that there's an infinite number of ways we can structure the round that are fair to both sides and give both sides equal access to the ballot. However, that begs the question of some external goal the debate is supposed to achieve, to depict which framework, all of which are fair, is best. So
Why? What's the word for that?
So my argument is that there are so many ways that we could structure the debate round to determine the better debate.
That begs the question of what that's like.
So my argument is that given all these options, we need some goal the debate is supposed to achieve to select the framework that is most suited to debate and determine who did the better debating. So my framework contextualizes what it means to do the better debating by appealing to what debate is supposed to be.
Okay. So do you respond to the? So you say skep negates. What was that argument?
There were two.
Okay, tell me those.
So the first is a risk of offense argument. You can never fully disprove it in order of the statement. There will always be some credence that you should give to these claims. There can never be terminal defense on a moral argument. Thus, there's always a risk of offense that morality is true, and thus that you would always have a proactive reason to affirm rather than just no reason to, you would always have a proactive reason to negate. You would never have a proactive reason to affirm. But the second argument is that this would actually, even if you triggered skep in the next speech, this would negate. Because if there is no morality, there's no way to say that we are being consistent with our function, and thus I have denied the truth of the resolution that voting ought to be.
All right, thanks.